We're going to talk a little bit about mobile payments. When you look at the ecosystem of what's happening in mobile, it really comes down to how do you transact. What is that thing that you transact to make it worthwhile? You're monetizing this. So we're going to go through some of the statistics, how this growth is happening, where it's happening. David will speak to a lot of stuff that are behavioral and statistical analysis that's going on in the space. Jack's going to talk a little bit about what we see in the marketplace. Between the three of us, we probably talk to dozens of different businesses every single week about what they see, what's happening, where they're having problems, where they're seeing contraction, where they're seeing some issues as far as consolidation and so forth. But I thought to start off, we'd take you through the history of mobile phones. And this is the first cell phone. Is that a bad joke or is nobody kidding? Cell phone. Okay. There we go. Phones have gotten smaller from where they started. Actually, Jack, raise your hand. Jack, do they know which one's Jack? Jack got his start selling these guys. If you remember that, we used to carry a little backpack with a battery. We've got through the Get Smart all the way to Entourage, where you're talking from your shoe to a device so small that Saturday Night Live had a lot of fun with that one. Early tablets. Mobile, not quite as easy to transact on.
Here. Who can tell me what you're seeing on the top? Anybody have a guess? Well, you see the light, but do you know what the picture is? Does anybody recognize the picture? No? Okay, so the top was Pope John Paul. You heard it? I had one answer on the back, I didn't catch it. So who can tell me what we're seeing on the bottom? Pope Francis? Yep, that's exactly what it is. So what you've got is an induction ceremony just 8 years apart from each other. You can see where the difference, just the landscape. Sometimes when I do these conferences or speak, I often look around the room to see how many people are looking down at their phones. And that's also a good gauge. You start to get a sense of whether or not you've got the audience or they're wrapped up in that mobile device. So one of the things that I like to try to do is share with you from my perspective what we're seeing as far as trends on the consumer behavior. Really trying to get a feel or a sense of really where the market is going, and we're going to kind of look at it from various different angles, and then I'll turn this over to Jack so that he can cover some more details. Tablets catching up with PC. You'll notice the purple line on the bottom is starting to angle up while the PC is ran relatively flat. Of course, the blue line is the mobile devices. So when you actually sit there and look at it, you've got this convergence between the tablet kind of taking over quickly on the actual PC. Off on the right-hand side, we're actually looking at the operating systems. So when we look at transaction data across our platform, across our retail merchants, what you're starting to see is a decline in the use of Windows, while some of the other applications or operating systems are actually starting to become more prevalent within that transaction space. So what's the fundamental change as you look at PC? You got a couple of statistics here. 350 million PCs sold in 2012, 116 billion units, right? Very, very locked down station. You can't really move around with it. It's not as mobile. But when you look at the mobile space, look at how the numbers just staggeringly grow. You've gone up to 6 billion mobile users, 1.7 billion devices sold in 2012. The numbers are almost 4 times, sometimes 4.5 times the PC space. So you can see where the transition is definitely growing more rapidly in the mobile space. And we're seeing this across our landscape.
You know, one of the bullet points, David, you point out is it's replaced every 2 years. What's the trend now? What's the new program you're seeing from the carriers?
Automatic replacement. Upgrades. Automatic replacement and upgrades.
Automatic replacement. How about a 12-month plan instead of a 24-month plan? How about no plan at all? You just replace when new technology comes out. Talk about speeding up the cycle.
Absolutely. Personal, taken everywhere, easy to use, right? Used for everything, moving towards even wearable, as Don was pointing out to you earlier. Now this is an interesting review. What we did was we studied the pattern of our consumers that are shopping at our retailers throughout the course of the day. And what you'll notice is that it probably follows suit, right? You probably can correlate to it. Morning hours, you're on your car and you're actually driving and using your mobile device. You're either making calls or you're making transactions happen. I hope you're not actually out there driving and texting, right? So let's try to disconnect those two. During the working hours, you're connected to the PC, whether it be at your home office, whether it be at your workplace. And of course, during the evening hours, what do you notice there? You're getting very comfortable. You've actually settled down, you're on your couch, your lazy boy, maybe in bed watching television. You've got your smart tablet. So you actually see the transaction data from our merchants throughout the course of the day based on usage. We were using actually a software called P-Wing, which helped us actually capture a lot of the device intelligence. So there's some technical trends. Obviously, on the consumer base, what we're noticing also is obviously consumers are becoming smart. They're doing some shopping while they're actually using their phones to actually look for information, get smart about the price points, figure out who the providers are so they can go out and find a better price point. Getting educated just on the information that the product has to offer, the features, the value, the benefits of the product. And so the integration of that technical data is obviously becoming more critical to the merchant. And on the payment trend space, what we're noticing here is a convergence between the retail physical goods and your traditional e-commerce space, right? So the idea of interacting, we see this obviously, most popular is the Apple iTunes store. We've seen various other stores starting to adopt similar technologies. And through that convergence, we're capturing very good marketable intelligence that could ultimately lead us to drive incremental sales, stimulate that customer to spend more. And so as you look at the next topic, which is more around the fraud, it's really about driving incremental sales. It's not about catching fraud. I'll turn it over to...
Thank you.
Absolutely.
David, thank you. Everybody hearing us okay? All right. So what we wanted to do, we're going to be really brief, and then we'll open it up to Q&A at the end. With David coming from a payment service provider with all this data, what we wanted to do is share actual data with you. There's going to be a lot of people over the next year or two, and there has been a lot of people that have been talking about mobile, and they've been talking about theories. And so what we wanted to do is share actual data. So David just shared some data that they see as a global payment service provider. At Kount, we spend millions of dollars a year to drive demand generation to my sales team. And so we get the inside scoop. We get to look to and talk to people who are real merchants today, not people who are talking about the merchants, but the actual merchants, and they're trying to figure out what does mobile mean. It's been a buzzword for the last 3 or 4 years. I think until this year, no one's really realized how fast and how hard it was going to come. You've got some early use cases that are proving to be very valuable, and they're super explosive. If you look at a company like Uber that wasn't around 3 or 4 years ago, and you got a $3 billion market cap this year, $300 million last year. So amazing hyperbolic growth when you make it easier for the consumer to use a device and you improve the model that's out there. So when we talk about fraud has gone mobile, let's take a look at some of the trends that we're seeing. So I don't know if you guys saw this article in Wired magazine. It was about 6 months ago. It's about a small town in Romania that is at the foothills of the Transylvanian Alps. It's about 120,000 people. And the interesting part that the #1 driver for GDP in this particular town, whose name I can't pronounce, is fraud, cyber fraud. So they literally went from, if you read the story, this village who had chickens in the yard and people literally bringing their products to market on a regular basis, to having Mercedes-Benz, Ferrari, Lamborghini dealerships. Now the local government didn't really stop what was going on because they weren't frauding themselves, they were frauding everybody else out there. And so what this really speaks is when we talk about fraud going mobile, the broadband connectivity of this town is probably not good, but they're able to conduct most of this fraud from their devices. So when we look, this is an actual hotspot map from Kount, from our company, that shows where we see fraud rings. And what we say at the company is that it isn't really people, it's really devices and people behind those devices that commit fraud. So they can disguise themselves and look, but we use a technology called Persona that starts looking and linking at technology, and it helps us see where these actual fraud hotspots are. For those of you sitting in Miami, guess where the #1 the most fraudulent place for committed fraud and perpetrated fraud is in the United States? Miami, Florida. Not by a little factor either. I mean, it blows everybody off the map. Dade County specifically, when you look at our map every morning, it's glowing. Behind that internationally, you go to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, pops up a lot. But what we're seeing is that the tactics and the technologies that people are using to perpetrate fraud, when you look at that Romanian town, they're not going to work to create commerce or to create business. they're going to work to steal what we're all doing and creating out there. They figured that's the path of least resistance, and that's the way they're going to go. So instead of rudimentary, hacking techniques, you're talking about people that are doing some things like we were talking about out in the lobby, bleeding, where they figure out a way to get under the veil and start taking a little bit at a time. And they may run that for 3 or 4 months, and they may be running that on 4,000 merchants at once. Then you have these giant slams where they'll come in and they'll gather information, and then in a 24-hour period, they will commit fraud. We were having dinner last night, and we were talking about the prior World Cup that took place. Great example. So we have a lot of ticket broker customers. There was a World Cup event that had 60,000 seats. The particular online ticket merchant sold almost 300,000 seats to that venue. You can imagine it when you have beer, and you have angry soccer fans, and you have 130,000, 230,000, too many people showing up. It's real, so we're talking about real dollars. Don, you had a question or a comment?
Just one thing to remember, when you look at a town like this, I can't pronounce it either, this Russian town, or many of the places throughout the third world communities, David pointed out 1.6 billion new devices in 1 year, 6 billion users. That economy didn't exist even a few years ago. And with what we're doing with making ourselves easier to access, get stuff, we're also enabling an entire new generation, an entire new channel where fraudsters have abilities to now come and get you. What was it? There's more phones than toilets.
Yeah.
Across the world. I think we cut a lot of the stats out that David was looking at, but it was more than toothbrushes. You can get a phone where you can't get running water in half of these countries. So what Jack's talking about is it's moving and growing. The ecosystem has gotten so big that now we're actually enabling a less sophisticated group to come into a very sophisticated opportunity.
Any questions on what we just said? And we'll keep rolling through the slides, but feel free to throw your hand up and ask me along the way. So when you look at where fraud can be committed, especially on an enterprise level, you start looking at choke points, and those choke points show up in the payment event. And that's where your technology is really standing in between you and any type of good, defensible or digital good. So when we look at those choke points, those are changing as well. You've got near-field communications, you have mobile apps, Square-type devices, you now have mobile wallets. Everybody's trying to get ahead of and try to figure out how to secure that transaction. So here's a pop quiz for you. A show of hands. Actually, the answer is here, isn't it? 42% of merchants believe that it's riskier than standard e-commerce. What is it more risky, e-commerce or m-commerce? The slide here shows that about 52% of the people think it's just as risky, and more than that think it's more than, about 48% think that it's less risky. The fact of the matter is it's about the same from everything that we've seen. Here's an interesting stat. So when you think about mobile, again, everybody has these theories on what it should be. And one thing I would caution is that when you start looking at the data, the initial glimpse at the data may not be what it seems. So when we work with a merchant, we're trying to set up not just their basic philosophy on mobile, so this new channel that they're opening up, but we're actually helping them make financial decisions on what orders they accept, what orders they review, or what orders they entirely decline. If we make those decisions, or they make those decisions wrong, they're going to offend a bad customer, or they're going to offend a good customer, or they're going to let through a bad customer. So what we do and how we set up that strategy has to be on. So when you look at initial data, this seems to be counterintuitive. The transaction approval rate is higher on an Android device, the most prolific device out there. And then you've got the iPad, who has a lower approval rate. So any ideas on, you got a question on why that is? Go ahead.
I've got a question as far as what metrics you're using to measure the risk associated with e-commerce versus non-commerce. I actually work with a payment processing partner as well. Yep. And we have token, KK solutions, all these things. And that's one of the biggest questions that our clients ask is the difference between, mobile commerce. Even if you have products that they utilize with end-to-end encryption, essentially it doesn't matter what app they use. If somebody has built in some type of virus within the app, essentially they can collect everything that's on your phone. So I'm curious to see how you would, as far as like the kind of metrics you use.
Right. But that information came from our mobile survey that we conducted. We haven't even released it to the public yet. But Don, maybe you can give them a little bit of information about the survey.
Yeah, we actually had 2,000 folks participate in our survey, and it's a mobile payments and fraud survey. So this is what they told us, and we took it from two different angles. One, what do retailers or online businesses say? And the second one was, what do service providers like the Global Collection, the Counts, and the Visas, and so forth, what do we say that we see out in the marketplace? And what merchants told us is, we think it's riskier. Well, our statistics show that, as Jack will show in a minute, it's a dead even. Here's the problem. It was growing last year, grew at about 18 or 19%, which is pretty healthy. What did m-commerce grow at?
127%.
Roughly. 127%. I mean, it was huge. So you can have 1% in both of those, which is hitting you harder. So some of the things that you see, even though the relative risk is similar, I mean, statistically it's even, we're seeing newer methods of fraud. We're seeing more of it because we're seeing more of these transactions come in. And what Jack will show you here in a minute is a lot of retailers aren't ready for it. They're misinterpreting the data. They're going, oh, we don't need to know. Or they don't see the risk relative to their product, to their tolerance for risk, what the payments types that they're using. All those things come together and they combine together for your strategy. The way we look at that is we look at the closed loop. We don't look at what was the attempt. We look at what was the end result. Did it result in a refund, in a chargeback, in some sort of fraud? So when we look at the end result of the entire transaction, that's where we get our data that says this is what really happened. But the mental process that retailers are going through is really interesting. Just last year, 60% of the people went, yeah, we're thinking mobile might be a decent channel to go after. And this year, it's about 85% of them saying we must be in the mobile channel. In 12 months, that's a huge swing in basically retailers' public opinion.
Thank you.
Any other questions? How about a guess? Anybody have a guess on why the different approval rates for these devices? Because when you look at this and you start to set a strategy, you would say, okay, I want to let all my orders go through on Android because I don't want to insult those customers. It has a very high approval rate, and I really want to scrutinize and review the iPad. Now, even when we think about that, that doesn't make much sense. If you go ahead, you got to guess.
Because iPads can be more readily used by children.
That would be a guess, but I don't think that's the answer. Here's another. That's another guess.
There's a lot more on iPad. It's hard to type things on a little phone, so iPad would have more transactions, therefore more fraud would be committed.
Yep. That's another guess. But then we look at this next slide, and it shows that the actual fraud rate by device is lower on an iPad and higher on all the handheld devices. So you start to see some conflicting data, but the slide that really tells the story, I think, is this. Look at the average transaction amount. So when you look at the orders that you're going to, as a merchant, that you're going to let through, when you start talking about triple digits, $100 or more, you're going to start scrutinizing those orders and looking at them. Now the fact of the matter is, I guess you can't do that with this mouse. The fact of the matter is on the previous slide it showed that iPads had a lower fraud rate, but what's flagging them for review is you've got a higher, lower fraud rate, but what's flagging them on the next slide is you've got a higher per dollar cost on them. So that makes sense too in the market. So you've got iOS, it's really taking the premium piece of the market, and then you have Android, which is an open platform. You can buy a $500 Apple phone, or you can buy a $50 or free Android phone. So it makes sense then that the commerce that goes through there. But if we would have just made the decision at the very beginning that we were going to set our fraud rules up to scrutinize the iPad customer, we would really be offending our highest value, probably our best customers. You got a question?
And why is there such a big difference between iPhone and iPad, the previous slide, compared to here where they're very close? It's about, double fraud rate on an iPhone versus an iPad.
Yep. And the cost, I don't...
Part of that is probably availability across the grid, right? So smart tablets are not necessarily readily available. Plus, they're prohibitive in cost. So one thing about the phone is, so you see 6 billion devices across the globe. Even the poorest of people have a phone, smartphones. in a prepaid fashion, they still have phones, but they don't necessarily walk around with tablets. So it's interesting because you really want to ask the right question and not necessarily turn off a channel or a transaction or review a transaction that, as Jack says, is your best customer. It could very well be your best customer.
Yes.
Have you sort of eliminated the pre-registered consumers, people with hard on file from this thing? Because surely they would be more.
Don, on our mobile data?
No, and in fact, oftentimes they're higher risk. Why would you have prepaid?
No, I meant like if you're sort of pre-registered with Amazon, you're. Yeah, that's what it meant, sorry.
Okay. That hasn't been deciphered and taken out specifically because most people don't look at their payment as that would be kind of a wallet. It's kind of a wallet in disguise, you know what I mean? Sort of like the Starbucks app. The Starbucks app is just a wallet. You just have a payment method that's in an app for Starbucks. It's a wallet, it's a mobile wallet, a e-wallet. So we kind of lump those in together when we look at our data because it's very difficult to pull those apart.
You also have issues with account takeover. So just because you have a registered user, people like to take over those accounts because you think they're good customers, and then they'll commit fraud under the guise of being an existing customer.
So I'm going to turn it back over to Don Bush now. He's going to finish up, but I wanted to see if there were any other questions as it pertains. So our view is we're seeing a lot of customers. We're talking to a lot of merchants about their strategy. The biggest difference from last year to this year is what I think Don mentioned there. Last year they were talking about mobile. This year they're scrambling. They've seen some evidence, so the wait-and-see crowd is really trying to jump on board. There is a lot of risk. If you're involved in that payment space, my biggest advice point would be to look beyond the initial set of data. Keep digging to see if you can find more than the top of the level trends, because if you don't, you could be turning away your best customers. Do you have one last question?
Yes, one time, just to sort of complete the picture. I mean, when people fail on bloody devices, they make phone calls and they still send, try and make, do transactions by voice over the phone. And I'm sure that, and I know from experience, that's as high fraud. Would you give any sense of how much higher? If you put card read over the phone on your slides, how much? What would that be?
We would consider that a whole separate channel. There's mail order, phone order, which would be what you mentioned. I've got an operator on the phone and I'm giving him my name, my address, my card number, my security code, all that different stuff. That would be called a phone order channel. And that's not specifically looked at in this particular data. We're looking at transactions completed on the device.
So
there is,
the phone order channel is different from the mobile.
That's when your voice is talking and making the transaction. There's data, and there's high degrees of fraud in that area.
Oh, it's very high. Yeah, I wonder how much higher.
The worst part of fraud in there is when you've got an operator that's taking that information and going, oh yes, let me enter all that information on my pad that I take home with me. And you can go sell that for, a minimum wage person sells a few of those, makes their week. Let me just go through this pretty quickly. I know we're running out of time, but this is some of the data that we said. Is it important for you to know if that transaction comes from a mobile device? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. The next question to me that I would have to you is why? Why is it important? What that shows is 80% of the people say, yeah, we think it's important. Only about 40% of the people can actually. If you're a retailer and you cannot tell where that transaction is coming from, you have a problem. Based on the product, the customer, the target, those types of things all change the strategy that you have to look at when you're dealing with payments and fraud from mobile devices. There isn't one set thing that says, oh, if you're selling Jimmy Choo's online, here's how you do it. Because every company has a different risk tolerance. Every company has different policies that strategize that makes them different in the market. The preferred method of payment. Somebody talked about pre-charge, I call it a wallet, because essentially it is. This is how it works. Credit cards, debit cards, prepaid cards, you might imagine, those are the preferred methods to use on a mobile device. Sometimes you can store them, sometimes you can't, but that's how people want to pay. It's working? There we go. Which payment types are right for your organization? Gift cards. You may be heavy into gift cards. Well, if you are, you need to know that fraud is 3 times higher in the gift card market. Why? Because they can counterfeit. It's a little bit easier to counterfeit when you don't have the power of Visa behind you. You're a closed loyalty card or something like that. A little bit easier to counterfeit. I want to talk just briefly about a case study, and then we'll close it down and ask your questions. But CD Baby is an American company. They're the largest online retailer of independent music labels. So if you want to go to Capitol Records and sell your music, that's a big label. It's hard to break in, right? Well, Ian, you can go there right now and record something and start selling it. People buy it, you can be the next Justin Bieber. Who knows? Right? Except if you get stopped for speeding in your Lamborghini, I hope it's more than 60 miles an hour. Jeez. What was happening is CD Baby is an affiliate group. They have a large affiliate channel. Does everybody understand what an affiliate channel is? Somebody sells for you, they get a little piece of the commission. They get a lot of commission. They get 75% commission when that affiliate channel sells something. So what does that do? Very attractive to fraudsters. They can turn their fraud into cash right away. That's what fraudsters look to do. Follow the money. How do they make money doing things? How fast can they turn your product into cash? If it takes them a long time, they move somewhere else. They go easiest point of inflection. So here's what they had. They had fraudsters posing as artists. These guys would actually go steal music or something, or they put a ringtone up there and say, hey, I'm going to sell my music. So they put it up on CD Baby and they post it for sale. Okay? Ready? 1, 2. Then they had that same fraudster join the CD Baby affiliate grouve. So now you've got a fraudster that says he's an artist. The same fraudster says I'm an affiliate. Guess what happens next?
With the buyer.
The fraudster bought. Took stolen credit credentials or some form of payment. Now you've got a fraudster saying, I'm a customer, buying from an affiliate, this artist. This is a slim margin business. How do you think CD Baby profited when you had 6 to 10% going to these people, 75% going to this guy, what's left over? Well, what they found out real fast is they paid a lot of money out, and then they had to pay fines because they started to get charged back, complaints. What was worse, they have a Facebook channel, they have an iTunes channel, they have an Amazon channel, and when iTunes starts getting a bunch of calls saying, hey, these guys ripped me off, guess what happens? iTunes says, we're going to take you off our store. That would devastate a company like this. Devastate. So they had a fraud problem. What they couldn't tell was where all this stuff was coming from, because they couldn't detect, were these people actually in Tupelo, Mississippi, or were they in Vietnam? Were they using a mobile device, or were they sitting here on a laptop? How can I tell if my artist and my fraudster and my consumer are the same people? Those are the things that you need to put in place to have a complete fraud strategy. You can't start piecing things together and hope it all works. It just doesn't. It's got to be talking with each other. All of your channels need to be talking to each other. Whether it's in the morning on your phone, at noon at the PC, at home on your tablet. You need to have something that talks all the way around so you know what's happening. Just to close this one, the main success factors on mobile. 1, a friction-free experience. That is the beauty of what Starbucks has done. I can get on my phone while I'm sitting at a stoplight, David. I can order something at Starbucks, and I just pick it up on my way. They've got the payment, they know what I want, it's friction-free. Beautiful. As opposed to some others that require all kinds of different stuff, and there's lots of friction in that payment. The payment space, at least on the mobile side, there's lots of people jumping in. Who's the clear winner? I don't know, maybe it's Square, maybe it's Stripe, maybe it's, who is that mobile payments type? So you've got to look at it and say, what are we going to accept? What are we going to think our customers want to use? There's a lot of room for moving around there. Understand how your particular mobile channel affects your particular business. Jack was talking about some stuff that Apple and Walmart have apps that you can be shopping. You walk into a Walmart and you get specials, right? You're on a mobile device. You're in iTunes. You sit over in this section. They go, hey, guess what? The iPad Mini comes with this today, because it's watching you from a geolocation area and transacting with you from the communication point. The industry's in flux. This is the point that really is important. The choke point is that transaction. It doesn't have to always be a payment. What if it's a free download? What if it's a free trial? What if it's an application, buying insurance online? It doesn't have to be a payment. It's a transaction of data. That's the choke point that everybody, good and bad, has to go through. And we want to make sure we know who's who. And the last point is that need for data is greater than ever. And I would say only one more point beyond this. The need for intelligent data is greater than ever. Jack made the point there saying, they've got this great data, but if it's not registered, if it's misinterpreted, you're going to insult your best customers. I know we're out of time. If you've got any questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'll be around here if you want to ask us. We also have the Kount booth at the exhibit hall if you want to come see us. Jack and David, thank you very much for your participation. Please come and see us if you've got questions, especially specific to your particular environment. And thank you again. Thank you.